Getting started. All right, everyone, welcome this evening to the third session of Germany Today, the new speaker series for the Transatlantic Outreach Program. Tonight, we're going to have Kyle Tredinnick speaking to us, the top alum. So the Germany Today series, just to let people know that haven't been part of it, we're conducting a 5-part speaker series throughout the academic year with different topics covered, from lectures, cultural topics, and then interactive sessions like this one. So if you've missed the past ones too, we had our speaker, Dr. Grevin, speak in October about the German and American electoral systems. We had a holiday session in December, and now Kyle. All of these sessions are recorded and can be found on our website. So if you have to knock off early too, then you'll be able to watch the recording after. I am Mallory Bubar. I'm the Education Projects Manager here at the Transatlantic Outreach Program and in charge of the speaker series. Also have our fearless leader up top, Jenny Wendell. Jenny, if you want to say hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks to Mallory for organizing and to Kyle for speaking on this topic. I'm excited to learn more.
Yeah, and to that, so Kyle Tredinnick is going to be talking to us about the cultural landscape of memory this evening. He's a geography educator for the University of Nebraska and Omaha Public Schools. He traveled to Germany as a 2018 top alum and has used that experience to focus on the development of materials looking at cultural landscape and other geographic topics. So I'm going to let Kyle take it away because he knows his topic best.
So can everyone see my screen? I have hopefully shifted this over. It's always interesting getting back into the Zoom world. So yes, my name is Kyle Tredinnick. I just put University of Nebraska system. It's fairly complicated from there. I'm a PhD student, but also a faculty member with the University of Nebraska Omaha in the Department of Geography, Geology there. And as I approach basically everything that I do, I try and approach it with a geographic lens. And with my top travel trip, top study tour, there we go, to Germany in 2018, that's what I was very much looking to do, is looking to try and incorporate as much as possible a geographic perspective into understanding the German landscape, trying to understand more about how we can incorporate geography into understanding all of this. And so throughout this, I'm going to be utilizing the chat box a lot. So make sure that you've got that open. And I'm going to start off with a quick, just trivia quiz here. Can anyone tell me, what does geography actually translate into? So in the chat box, throw in your guess. Earth study, pretty close. So ology is more the study. So that's our geology. So the fun one about geography is we translate into earth writing is what we technically are. And I like to go with this analogy where earth writing, our alphabet is place names and locations. Then our landscapes are our books. And then our monuments and our memorials are our stories. And so that's what I'm really interested in here, is looking at the landscapes, looking at the monuments, and especially in a country like Germany, how do they remember different parts of their past, especially considering that there's some rather complicated pieces of their history. So moving right along here. The abstract here, just to break this down and kind of reiterate what we're going over for. The main thing that I'm focusing on is reading landscapes, kind of going over the process, what that means, because this is a fairly instrumental part of what it means to be a geographer. This goes back all the way to a geographer by the name of Carl Sauer, who came up with the whole idea of landscape interpretation, 1925. And we're going to be looking at how can we use the cultural landscape to make better sense of what we see around us and to make sense of the world. And then throughout this whole process, I'm going to go over some tips and strategies to try and incorporate more geographic thinking into that, or into the study. So here's my major objectives. So my PhD is specifically in geographic thinking and how to incorporate geography, actual geography into courses. The big thing that I want to push for here is what I'm really looking to try and get you to come away with from this is helping students develop their geographic capabilities. And the geographic capability that we're looking at here is data. And the data is actually our landscapes. So think of it more of like a qualitative data set. So there's a whole bunch going on here, but basically that's what we're getting down to is how to think about landscapes like a geographer. So to start off right away with this, and here's where we're using the chat box again. I've got a picture on the right here. And what I want people to do is just take a minute, look through and identify which pieces really stick out. And then think about what sorts of things does this tell us about this landscape by the presence of these different objects in the landscape. So just in the chat boxes or in the chat box there, just think about or identify what are some of the features that step out here. Okay, churches, religious, the vineyard. Yeah, since it's in the foreground, that's the, pardon the pun, but the low-hanging fruit. Yes, drinkers. So we got a river. Hills. And Jenny, I'm going to give you an extra challenge because Jenny was on this study tour. Does she know which city this is? So the
Is it Esslingen
no,
or Würzburg?
Würzburg. That is the correct answer. So yeah, the easy one with this is usually going through and identifying the characteristics. The kids pretty quickly see the vineyards, and a couple people or someone here chimed in. Oh, Andrew, yes, vineyards. You've got the drinkers. Yes, Germans enjoy a spot of wine, especially your Bavarians. And then the church spires. The church spires always are very prominent. And one of the things that I point out is the clustering of the churches. And so you have a very obvious city center there where all the churches are located. And so you have a heavy focus on religion. And this is especially true for Bavaria, where you still have that heavy Catholic influence, but then also the Lutheran getting in there a little bit here and there. But then the river, which I think Jenny is the one that pointed that one out, highly instrumental. So just thinking about what does the river represent here? This represents connections. This represents transportations. This represents commerce. And oftentimes with these older German cities, this is the very core of the city where these rivers were going. And this particular picture was taken from Würzburg right up against the wall of the castle that would have overlooked the river here. So just an easy practice. And this is one that I like to actually start off with pretty regularly is putting just at the start of class, put a picture up there and have the students get used to going through this practice. And I've attached a activity sheet here that kind of goes through the process of just identify something, then tell me what this means. And what's particularly helpful about this activity is students become the providers of information. Is just going back to the picture is there's pieces in here that, yes, I'm the one that took the picture. Yes, I'm the one that put it out there, but kids are going to notice a whole bunch of different things. And they're the ones actively participating in the process of reading the landscape. The access sheet, hopefully this should work. All right. So in the chat box, I just posted the link to my super awesome, cool, amazing teacher website that will have all the materials for this. And so the activity sheet is on there. Also, this presentation is on there. So where this fits in, the cultural landscape. So I'm heavily involved in geography. That's my discipline. That's what I'm focusing on here. I just wanted to make these key connections here that the cultural landscape is heavy, not only in the AP Human Geography standards or course and exam description, but also the national geography standards. Just because it is an important skill, it is an important process that geographers engage in understanding the landscape. So, some of the key geographic concepts that are attached here. The number one is place. So place is the human and the physical attributes of a location that give it its character. And so my picture here, yes, I've got the marker for the old synagogue here in Bonn. We've got the Rhine River there. And then we also have the Kennedy Brücke, or the Kennedy Bridge, in the background. Just looking at Bonn's history as the capital during the period of West Germany. But then also there's a whole bunch going on here where you've got the Cold War history with the Kennedy Bridge, but then in the foreground, the marker for the old synagogue where the synagogue was and was obviously destroyed during the World War II period. So place is one of those key concepts in geography that comes up over and over and over. And so that's what I'm really focusing on as I guess, a content marker. So to kind of hammer in the idea of place, what I want people to do, and maybe not 3, just because that might take a little bit, but just think of where you're at right now. What is one of the distinctive physical features or human features that is present in the landscape that when you think of this location, this is one of the defining features? So just in the chat box here, and if you've got enough time, you can just throw in a couple more. But just thinking, and I have the example for Omaha down there. And this was actually somewhat challenging because you got to try and think of what makes this location different than other locations, or what makes this more of a character than any others. So just in the chat box, what are some features that stick out that kind of characterize where you're from? And one of the challenges is you always have to think of, okay, what is a feature that is unique to this place that maybe others don't have? Okay, got a couple here. The Potomac River, so Pentagon Building, abundant trees, rolling hills, State Capitol Building. People are nice, surrounded by farmland. Sheila, where are you? Sounds very Midwest. Because Jenny's coming in from DC. Oh, Lincoln. Okay, yes, that's what I thought. Yeah, I thought I recognized your name. Yeah, so just thinking of, so the most German American city, is that Milwaukee? Is that where you're going for, Andrew? But yeah, just it's those cultural features. So that's one that was kind of jarring when I moved from Minnesota down to Omaha here, is people kept talking about the fish fries. And being originally from Minnesota, I'm like, yeah, fish fries, that's what you do on Fridays. That's, you just go to a country bar, that's what you do. But no, fish fries down here, it's more of a Catholic feature, more during Lent. And it's because down here was the Catholic Germans, and Minnesota was more the Protestant Germans. So getting into some of those cultural features and how those are imprinted on the landscape. One of the features for Minnesota is we've got a lot of those German breweries from those Lutherans. So the strategy that I'm bringing in here is, again, just bell ringers. So anytime that you can get students looking at photos, interpreting them, trying to pick out what are the major features there, this can be a great way to get them practicing reading the cultural landscape. Kind of the next step to that is getting students to provide the photos as well. and you can challenge them. You can say, hey, here's a particular topic that we're talking about in geography this week. Go find me a picture that talks about this concept, bring it back, and let's analyze it as a class. And so this even more gives the students the agency to go through and be the providers of information, the analyzers of information, where they're actually actively participating in analyzing the landscape and not just putting a picture in front of them and hoping them that they are giving you the answers that you want them to. So, along with place, one of the other major features that geographers are really interested in is this idea of sense of place. And so you think of where you're from and the meaning that you attach to it. So the example that I've got here is also from study tour. We went to Chemnitz, and I hope that I am getting my German pronunciation right here, this Kosberg prison here in Chemnitz, where a foreign tourist like myself is going to have different meaning than someone who lived in Chemnitz or Karl Marxstadt at the time, with this symbol of oppression is how some may view it. Or others, maybe people that were interned here, are going to view Kosberg prison as a place of pain or loneliness. And so the meaning that different people attach to these places at different times is that sense of place. And so that's one that you can always engage with your students on how different places have different meanings. So to you, what might just be a regular city street, to them could be home. And so that's one way to talk about these conversations. But this is an important piece when we're talking about landscapes, is recognizing that a lot of the landscapes, the meaning on the landscapes is kind of beholden to whoever's actually viewing it. Someone who's never been to Germany is like, okay, that's a cool landscape. Whereas when I put up the picture of Würzburg, Jenny, who had also been there, is able to automatically transfer back and be like, oh, yes, this has particular meaning to me. And someone who hasn't been there is going to have a completely different relationship with that. So that's what we're getting at with sense of place. And that's going to be a huge part as we get into the monuments and memorials here. Part of the sense of place is the process of place making. So a large part of this is in what we call toponymy, or the study of place names, and how it very much is a political act. So as a geographer, I'm an education geographer, but then I'm also a political geographer. So this one is always interesting for me. And just looking at how place names and locations or place names change over time based on who's in power. So on our study tour, we went to the city of Chemnitz, which used to be called Karl Marxstadt, which with the new German government, that one wasn't as befitting for the image that they wanted for East Germany, which is now just part of Germany. And so Germany has had to go through this whole rotation of thinking about, okay, these places were named this during this period, this during this period. Which name do we actually stick with? And that's something that many countries, including the United States, are having to deal with, of how to actually, or what process do countries go through in order to kind of make a place their own. And place names can be definitely part of that. Another part of that is the alterations that or that are made to the landscape. And this is especially prevalent in what we would call counterculture, where you've got the process of tagging, where people are going through and they are adding their own mark to the landscape, which some people see as almost like a defiling of the landscape, whereas some people are like, no, we are making this place our own. And you are trying to build up the identity of a place. And so again, in this one, or in these two pictures here, they're both from Chemnitz. Chemnitz in East Germany, heavy AFD territory, and you have this kind of like counter revolution where people are kind of fighting against the direction of the local government. And one of the ways they're doing this is through this protest tagging with the stickers and the actual graffiti art there. But then this gets even more so, where because of the meaning that is added to places, you get these, like, what I would call, like, well, the importance attached to landscapes, and they become symbolic to the point that they now become targets. So the example that I've got here is Sachsenhausen, and I can never pronounce this one, Oranienburg, northeast of Berlin. The concentration camp that has been kept as a memorial that we'll talk about here in a little bit more. But in 1992, someone tried to destroy it as not an attack, well, an attack to try and eliminate that part of Germany's history, more so that, and Jenny, you can back me up on this one, is that it was a far or an extremist trying to basically say the Holocaust was a farce, and so they attacked it as this ongoing plot. And so that's where an attack on a building becomes more than an attack on a building, because that building has deeper symbolic meaning. And so this really gets into some bigger discussions, because it all gets into how are different events remembered. And so from the same location here at Sachsenhausen, we'll use this as a way to bring in what we're calling the landscape of remembrance. How different pieces of history are remembered as actual physical manifestations on the landscape. And one that I thought was fascinating was in Sachsenhausen, that was in East Germany. Yes, they kept the pieces for the prisoners, or the people that were interned for the Jewish Holocaust, or the Shoah. But then the most prominent monuments were for the political prisoners and the Soviet soldiers who were killed there. And yes, that was the main population that had been held there. But the question has to be asked is, how would these monuments have been different had this concentration camp been located in West Germany instead of East Germany during the division of Germany, or during the division of Germany during the Cold War. And so one of the things we have to establish with this is, what is a memorial? And I've got the source here at the end. I've got the full source. This is Dwyer and Alderman. Alderman is the former president of the American Association of Geographers, and he does a lot of work on memorials and monuments, specifically in the American South. But what I really like that he ties in here is that it's a memory aid. It's a way to remember what happened. And it's a physical way to say, here's what it is, here's what we're trying to remember. And it's usually an interpretive piece as well. So an important part of this are two geographic concepts that will tie in, of site and situation. Site, the easiest way to think of this is the actual location. So where is it? The situation is what's around it. And both of these are significant when you're talking about monuments and memorials. So the example that I'll give here are two different monuments that were in Berlin when I was there. I guess that would have been 2021 or 2022 here, or 2022. Both of them, the site is good. They're visible. They're out in very prominent positions in Berlin. One's in a museum. So that's the situation. The one on the right, however, is right in front of the Russian embassy. So you're talking about two memorials, two monuments. They're talking about Germany's stance with the Ukrainian people, but the situation on where these are specifically located in proximity to other things makes the biggest difference here. So the one on the left, looking at the Museum of Communication, yes, that's very prominent, it's very visible, but then the one that I would argue is more impactful is the one that is right in front of the Russian embassy, And I always like to point out the barricades in the background there, preventing it from being even further or even closer to the Russian embassy. So what we're going to do here is specifically focusing on the Holocaust and different sites or different ways of remembering the Holocaust. I'll kind of walk through here and we can kind of go through in the chat a little bit again. Which you think is more important, the site or the situation? So site, again, where is it physically located? Situation, what's located around it? And so what I'll do is, again, in the chat box, just think site, situation, and I'll kind of go over what they are, what they're kind of representing. So, quick shout out too that I was talking about with Mallory here. Since I'm bringing up the Holocaust, actually right now, NCGE, the National Council of Geographic Education, is putting on a Geographies of Genocide webinar that if you are an NCGE member, you'll be able to go back and view later. Obviously, you're here now, so can't really go see it now. All right, so the first one is, all right, I always get this one, the Stolpersteine. Yes, all right, Jenny's there giving me the thumbs up. And this was a public arts project. It's been going on for a number of years here. And if you're unfamiliar with them, they are, the translation is stepping stones or stumbling stones, and they are in the concrete, they're in the pavement, outside of the locations, the workplaces, the homes, the synagogues where different victims of the Holocaust lived, worked, went to school. And on the stones themselves, the names when they were arrested, possibly when they were murdered, are all located on that. So going back to site, the location, situation, what it's next to, which factors are most kind of at play in this one? Or I guess what's more important, the site or the situation? The actual physical location or what they're located next to? And it's tough, and this is always difficult because people are like, don't want to be wrong. And at the bottom there, I've got a citation for an article that deals specifically with the Stolpersteine, that talks a little bit more about the project too. Right. Situation. And Mallory, I'm going to agree with you on this one, where the situation is more important. And this is actually one of the controversies about this art project in the first place is the site is kind of secondary. And that's been the biggest controversy, is that they'll put the stones in the ground where they could potentially be stepped on. And that process of stepping on them could be seen as disrespectful. But the people that organized this project thought that it was much more important that the stones were located in close proximity to where the people actually lived or worked or what have you. So this is one of those situations where situation is what's being most shown. And then this next one, this is in Berlin, the Babelplatz, and I had to leave a little marker there that during the time that this happened, this was the Franz Joseph Platz. And this is the empty bookcase memorial, marking the spot where the public book burning happened with, trying to think of the old name of the university. Now it's Alexander Humboldt University. But in this one, is it site or situation? Is the main factor deciding? Yeah. Site. Jenny's coming in. She's 2 for 2. is it was more important that the memorial was located in the spot that it happened. And what's unique about both of these is that they're right in the middle of where people are. And that's the whole purpose of the stepping stones, is that oftentimes if you look at memorials in the United States, it's people have to make the cognitive decision that they are going to go and engage with them. With the stepping stones, it brings the Holocaust and the memory of the Shoah into the communities where people are going to engage with them, whether they like them or not. So it's supposed to be an in-your-face alteration to the landscape that pushes the memory of the Shoah or the Holocaust directly out into the landscape where people have to engage with it. This one, same deal. It's a very busy square in the middle of Berlin. And so people, again, are going to be passing through it. But it just so happens to be in the middle of Berlin. A lot of Berliners, though, not necessarily going to go to the middle of the state or the city unless they absolutely have to. So another one here, site or situation. So the concentration camp of Sachsenhausen, where buildings have been preserved from it. A lot of them were destroyed. Sachsenhausen does have quite a history to it, where not only was it part of the Nazi regime, but then also it was used to house political prisoners and captured Nazis essentially during the Cold War. Yes. And to Andrew's point, very much so, is it's one of those where you may be walking along and you could just as easily miss them, or you could just as easily stumble upon them, literally, and you see them and then they're suddenly there and you have that memory right away. So with this one, Sachsenhausen, site or situation. What's the main consideration for the memorial? Yes, Mallory going back with it, site is the memorial, the monument, the main place or the main consideration was it is where it is. They didn't move the memorial to Sachsenhausen somewhere else. They kept it where it's at. So then the last one here is the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. This one, since it's a trick, or it's more or less a trick, I'm going to go with, and just let you know, it's both site and situation. They just happen to have the land in the middle of Berlin, right at the end of the Cold War, because this was the quote unquote death strip where the Berlin Wall was located. And when the Berlin Wall was removed, they had this site available, and that's when they decided that that's where this monument to the murdered Jews of Europe belonged. So it was very much both, where they had the site. It's an area that was instrumental, or that was meaningful for a lot of people, but then the situation, by giving it to and yes, Andrew, you're getting ahead of me already here. So the situation, it's close to a lot of things, but the main thing is right in the middle of the city, and they are designating this location to focus on remembering this uncomfortable piece of German history. And just real quick here, just because geographers were going to do this, going back to the stepping stones, that's the map on the left here. And the city of Berlin, the location of these different stepping stones. And you just see that there are so many of them that they're really just running into each other. As opposed to in the middle, I've got the monument for the murdered Jews of Europe, and then the empty book, or the empty library. And then this map on the right is Sachsenhausen and how far out of Berlin it is. So we're dealing with different scales here, but all the same, you're looking at which one's going to be more impactful. And it really depends. And going back to this whole idea of with Sachsenhausen, people are having to make the conscious decision to go. Whereas with the stepping stones, just about anywhere you are in the city center of Berlin, you have a high likelihood of coming across them. And so one more piece about this is that as I've been talking about, or as I just mentioned, scale, we go from local scale, where this is in the neighborhood, then you're going to state scale, where this is, or national scale. These are things that are connecting to the experience of an entire country. And now we're going to international scale. This is a picture that I took last weekend when I was in Boston. Just happened to be there walking along on the Freedom Trail, and there was a monument to the Shoah right in the city center, just barely away from one of the more important sites with the American Revolution. It's pretty close to Paul Revere's house. But because the Holocaust was an attack on a group of people more so than on a location, people in different areas engaged with it and have pushed for remembrances in the landscape elsewhere as well. And so to Andrew's point, thank you very much for bringing that in. Sometimes just as significant as what's in the landscape is what's not in the landscape. And this was the conscious decision by the German government to not put much of a marker. There's now an interpretive sign at this parking lot, but this was the death site of Adolf Hitler. And beyond this, the only other major marker of the Nazi Empire was the Luftwaffe building, which is a very unassuming building that when you walk past it, you wouldn't really recognize is much of anything. And a lot of that goes back. All right, I'm not even going to try with this word. Jenny, if you can help with that one.
That says Abzeichengesetz.
Yes. So the Badges Act of 1960 that prohibits the public display of Nazi symbols on the landscape. So this is, they've gone through very much so and just said, yes, it's part of the history, but it doesn't belong in the landscape. And so I'm going to kind of move back to this because I'm going to come back to these specific pictures. And we're going to kind of look at a different part of Germany's history here, specifically at the division of Germany and some of the ways that it's been remembered specifically in Berlin. And as we're looking at these things that you can kind of think about is, why are these located where they are? So again, getting into those situation questions. And then the significance, why are these represented how they are? So the first example here, looking at Checkpoint Charlie. Why is this one of the symbols that has remained? The site, fairly easy. This is one of the crossing points between East Berlin and West Berlin. But why is it that this is the crossing point that was kept? And how is it being kept? And how is it being represented? And when you look at it, you've got the American side on, or you've got the Americans represented on one side, the Soviets represented on another. So looking at how is the Cold War remembered, or how is the division of Germany remembered in this spot? It's remembered more as a division between the United States and the Soviet Union. Then right next to this, and this is basically across the street, is all across the city, specifically here on Mauerstrasse, is the location on where the Berlin Wall was located. So even though it has been removed from the landscape, they're still leaving markers on where it was. So just one way to look at it. Another one is Bernauer Strasse, and this, I believe, is more northern part of the city. You get so turned around when you're on the subway. So just looking at how the Berlin Wall is remembered here. And you've got two different representations at this Bernauer Strasse location. You've got the construction of the wall in the main picture, but then on the left, you're showing a little bit of the resistance to the wall, putting the big picture of Konrad, it should be Schumann, jumping the wall in 1961. And so, yes, you're remembering the wall itself, but then in the same location, you're representing the resistance to the wall and keeping that in the landscape. And then another way of remembering the wall is, so the Haus der Geschichte. Yes, I'm getting a nod from Jenny, so my German is still sticking with it. In Bonn, and how the wall is remembered. And so you're taking and you're moving the site of the wall to be able to continue how the wall is remembered, and saying that this is not just a part of the history and the landscape in one spot. This has deeper significance and deeper meaning for the state. And this actually brings up another point on landscapes and how geographers will view landscapes. And this we'll start alluding to a little bit more here, is how do you remember the most unsavory parts of your history? Do you throw them in the landscape, or do you put them in the museums? And the argument is, if you put them in the museums, you can add that historical context, and instead of venerating it with this honored space in the landscape, you're putting it in a place where it can be contextualized and better understood. And so you're taking that situation factor out by citing it specifically in a museum. So this picture that I took was in one of the main German museums on Museum Island in Berlin here. It's one of the few places that you'll actually find symbols of the Nazi Reich anywhere on display. So going back to this, when you're going through and talking about monuments, these are some of the guiding questions that you can work through with students of where are the monuments, or where aren't the monuments? What is being represented? Who isn't being represented? What is being represented? How is this being represented? And so just getting students to think about, even with their own locations, what is being represented and how. And this gets me to my next point of, this is actually a very convenient way, or a very good way, of teaching what I would call controversial geographies. So I've mentioned in the United States, we're having a lot of these discussions where we're talking about our own monuments. How do we remember our own pieces of history? And by using Germany as an example instead, you can do two things. And I'm calling these geographic displacement or historic displacement. And a lot of this is linked back to this article by Jonathan Lieb, which I have more fully cited at the end. I would highly recommend it. And he's dealing with specifically how to deal with uncomfortable parts of history, and how do you get students engaging with them without emotionally attaching to them to the point that they're no longer thinking about the actual issues, and they're only thinking about their own personal feelings. So the geographic displacement, instead of, so if you want to talk about monuments and you want to talk about place names, instead of talking about US monuments and US place names, you talk about these monuments and place names in Germany, and say, all right, what is the value? What are we losing by not having these represented in the landscape? What should we represent in the landscape? And getting students to think critically there by thinking about the geographic displacement. And then the historic displacement is, again, we're not looking at current history, we're looking at past German history. And so trying to detach students emotionally from the topic lets them think clearly about it. And then that allows them to take the next step of say, okay, here's what I thought about Germany's monuments. Now, what do I think about the United States' monuments? So what this does is you can use Germany's monuments as a way of talking about this, bringing up the concepts, talking about sense of place, talking about place, site, situation. And then you can localize it by having students look at their own areas and thinking about, so Andrew, I'm going to pick on you because I don't know much about Milwaukee actually. So what are some of the monuments, and just in the chat box, not only Andrew, everyone else, Ken as well. What are some of the monuments that are located in your city? Who is being represented in those? So just in the chat box here, I'm trying to think for Omaha. I'm still a transplant to Omaha is what I'm counting it. I know we've got one for Standing Bull. we've got a monument for Malcolm X because he was born here. Leif Erikson. Yes, get that Viking blood. Henry Flagler, Palm Beach. So, yeah, as you think through this, and then Jenny, you're going to have way too many to list. Think about, okay, why are these people being represented? So, yes, Sheila coming out of the city of Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln being there, David Thompson, Salish House. Yeah. So why are these being represented there? Who's not being represented is a big picture. And that's one specifically with Omaha. So I'm just going to pick on Sheila here. They've got a monument for Abraham Lincoln, their namesake. But in the city of Omaha, we don't have a whole lot about the Omaha people, which is our namesake. Yes. So, I've got a couple resources linked on this page particularly where you can add another geographic layer to this. So Survey 123 is a tool that is available freely from Esri. It's a mapping software. This is an activity where you can go get students taking pictures, collecting data out in the landscape of what is being represented, who is being represented. One of the ones that you can really get into this, if you don't have many monuments, look at the street names. Who is represented in the street names? Who's represented in the place locations or the names of different place locations? Having students, sending students out into the community to learn about their community by looking at who's being represented, how, and where. Okay, so kind of wrapping up the formalized process of this. One of the things that I've linked here that I will be able to open up. Yes, this should still. So from my study tour that I took in 2018, this was my deliverable that I came up with, was this lesson plan on the landscape of remembrance. So it is in the format, goes through the process. And then I have also included the slides that should actually be in the lesson plan as well, where it's got the different pictures and it's a guided practice of getting students to look at who and what is being represented in the landscape. So this is a good way of going through and saying, all right, let's look at Germany. What is being represented and how in the landscape of Germany, and then being able to break into those additional conversations of who and what is being represented in your own landscapes. Because like we've got Karen talking about Flagler, which I've been to Florida before. I've heard the name. But I mean, it's obviously someone that has local significance, but not necessarily so much significance outside of that specific location. So there's that activity. And then the sources here, I just want to point out some of these that are specific or were particularly helpful. This Lieb one is probably for a lot of social studies teachers very relevant right now of how to teach controversial topics, specifically in geography. And he uses the Confederate battle flag as a specific example, and then also talks about street names and Confederate monuments. Jonathan Lieb is at Old Dominion University. So very timely on that. And then the Alderman one here, it's a book. It's, I don't think very expensive on Amazon, but it also goes into a whole bunch of examples in the American South. So you can get that geographic displacement with a more localized example if you're not in Southeast United States. So that is kind of the wrap up for what I've got for the formalized process. But what I want to kind of open up with is just what are some things that you thought about? What are some questions you may have? I've got some reflection questions here. And I don't know, Jenny or Mallory, what the specific process is here, but I am more than welcome to having people unmute, ask specific questions, and then I'm sure between all of us, we can kind of answer those as best as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to go through these or if people just have general questions that they would like to ask. If we want
Yeah.
to do a hand raise, we can do a hand raise, or if people want to unmute too and just unmute and ask and talk. Yeah, up.
Oh, shoot.
There were a couple of things that I saw as you were going through your slides that kind of stuck out to me in terms of, well, just random thoughts from Jenny, and also maybe like other areas where you can also like dig into this topic. One of the memorials that you show in Berlin is the Neue Wache. And that one's really interesting because it's been the same location since, I don't know if it's like 1800s, maybe even the 1700s, and it's been a memorial, and it's had like 5 different names depending on what political regime was in power at the time. And so I think that's a really interesting one to look at all of those different names that this same memorial has had.
If you're unfamiliar with the Neue Wache, it like with each different German government, it got a different meaning attached to it. And so its present one is just this overall general like memorial against tyranny. And it's meant to represent the Pieta, where it's a mother cradling a dead son. And so the monument has remained relatively the same throughout the history, but just the meaning that has been attached to it has changed with each administration that's come in.
That was one thing that stuck out to me. Also, like you were talking about with Chemnitz and Karl Marx similar thing. And then street names is a really big topic in Berlin right now as well. As there are neighborhoods in Berlin where the streets are all named after leaders who were part of Germany's colonial governments in Africa. And as Berlin has changed over time, the people who are living in those neighborhoods right now, their families have migrated to Berlin, and many of those people's families were victims of these colonial leaders. And so there's a lot of discussion in Berlin, a lot of political activism to get those street names changed. And they've changed some names so far, but in typical German fashion, the bureaucracy seems to continue to hold things up. But that's a really big topic there. There's going to be a lot of resources and articles and things online if that's a topic that's maybe relevant to where you're living and you want to use that as an opportunity to open up the conversation.
And like it's convenient because so originally being from Minnesota, we had a large lake in Minnesota called Lake Calhoun, named after John C. Calhoun, who had never been to Minnesota, was a strong supporter of continuing slavery. And there's a big movement to rename the lake. And it got very heated, and classroom discussions could be very complicated. Eventually, it was changed to its original, I believe, Dakota name of Bidamakaska instead of Lake Calhoun. But talking about it in class could be too much of a touch point. So that's getting to that geographic displacement that I was talking about, if I can get to it there. Of instead of saying, all right, let's talk about Bidamakaska versus Lake Calhoun, let's talk about Chemnitz versus Karl Marxstadt. And let's start critically analyzing what are the positives and negatives of keeping the name, changing the name. What are the connotations to keeping the name, changing the name, and getting students to be able to critically think that, and then possibly switching over and saying, all right, now apply what we were just doing here to some of the local examples. Yeah, Denali versus Mount McKinley. where you're looking at traditional native name for the people that are there versus McKinley, who, correct me if I'm wrong on this, never even went to Alaska. So there's, and this one is a very pointed discussion right now, is what, not even 10 days ago that the executive order came down for that. The Gulf of America thing is another one, where you can go through and say, all right, what is the significance of this? Why is this happening? And it's getting back into this whole idea of placemaking, which adds another element of complication to my job of being a geography educator, of now like, okay, I have to go to teach on Monday. What the heck am I supposed to do with my map? So yeah, the whole idea of geographic displacement, again, goes back to, let's get the students thinking critically. Let's get them thinking geographically. Let's look at the data. Why does this need to happen? And so that's really what we're getting at with our geographic capability, is this critical thinking. So
Yeah.
oh,
I think actually like your thoughts on this. When I used to teach, I used like I said, a project for them when I would teach on the Holocaust, where I would have students select, I think it was usually just one person and what happened to them in the different, at least like 10 locations that they were moved to through between the years 33 and 45, to get them not only thinking about the Holocaust being this clean narrative, everybody went to Auschwitz, like to disrupt that, but then also just thinking about the things that we hear about displacement in general, the displacement that's going on around the world. What does that actually look like physically? Can we understand it? Can we see it?
and yeah, and it's one of the things getting out of that is you get an appreciation, what I would almost classify as empathy, of being able to look at it and say, all right, here's what this person went through, here's what they experienced. And that's actually one of the things we're going through with landscape analysis, is the empathy of who connects with this landscape, how do they connect with this landscape, how can I relate to this connection. So whereas a historian deals with documents and can deal with those stories, we're looking at different sorts of stories. Both, I would say, are valuable. I would just ask any additional questions that people have here.
Not so much question, but comments, because it's taken me back into because I did the tour this past summer, and some of the pictures that you show, I do have them, and I'm trying to figure out a way, because I know when I'm doing the Holocaust, I'm gonna use my photograph to make it more alive, and any video clip I have. So it's not much a question. There's so many things going in my mind because I'm in Florida, and you know, displacement and all of that that is happening. And as you said, with the map of Gulf of Mexico, so it's my mind is wheeling. So for me, I hope that they will have this video posted somewhere so I can go back over it, because that's the best way for me to learn, and also to apply what I learn, is that I need to revisit it, because you said a lot of good things, so I just need to go back, revisit, and when I'm doing my lesson plans, not just a Holocaust, because I see where I can use a lot of the stuff that I have, and to know how to put it together. So I just want to thank you for sharing, and you got my mind spinning and turning, and I'm trying to think of stuff that I see and I captured while I was in Germany. But good.
And I just reposted the link to where these materials are located, so you can go and access the PowerPoint. I don't think it has editing privileges, but you can go in and copy whatever you need out. One other element that I'll add here. So I've got my contact information in Omaha, actually, here in October 17th through 19th. the National Council of Geographic Education is going to be having its annual conference, and we're happy that TOP is going to be joining us there this year. And we're going to be having, sounds like, a table and hopefully some presentations. And one of the pieces that we're specifically going to have at TOP or at NCGE is we're going to have a workshop specifically dealing with teaching the Holocaust from a geographic perspective. So if you are a world history teacher or you're teaching the Holocaust, which is an increasing topic, it's a topic that is, I think more states have mandated Holocaust education recently. So if you want tips, strategies, ideas on how to incorporate those into your classes, this conference will hopefully be a nice way to do that.
Can I just add something?
Yes, please.
It's not a question. So I grew up in Germany. I'm actually a Brit who grew up in Germany, so I was always able to not be German, and so I went through the German school system. The different, layers, or I should say, the different like phases of how history was taught, ranging from very guilt-laden to not so guilt-laden. And again, being the Brit, I was always like, oh well, I can kind of pick and choose. I now live in the States. I've been here for 20 years, and that's one of the just having that distance now from Germany has made me really just look at a much different, deeper level. And one thing that I find fascinating, and I was a little distracted during the presentation. I had some stuff going on here, so I apologize if you covered this or not. But I find it intriguing and also very hard to explain to the kids how some German communities have repurposed World War II monuments in what for some students sound really like disrespectful or just like bizarre. So for example, three examples. In Nuremberg, the Nazi rally grounds, if you walk from the underground to the stadium, I lived in Nuremberg for a year and I don't often see the soccer games there. One of the cement like bunker areas that back during the Nazi rallies had been, I think, like a dorm for the visitors, has now been converted into a soccer fan club room. And when I walked past it, I mean, there was like Rammstein music blaring out of it and just a bunch of like drunk soccer fans. I'm like, wow, this is so bizarre. Another example, it just opened up this summer. I don't know how familiar you are in Hamburg. There's this massive above ground bunker. I think it was an air shelter bunker, but it's above ground. It's like multi-story. If you just Google, it's near St. Pauli. And apparently it was deemed so impossible to destroy, so they just left it. So as a child, I remember just seeing this massive, I mean, we're talking about like 20 stories high, this huge air raid shelter above ground. And now it's been converted into this green space where there's like this green roof, there's apartments in there, there's clubs. And right there, when I teach my kids this, clubbing in an old, basically Nazi bunker, that just blows their mind away. Just this whole idea of repurposing and kind of going out of your way to make it like, it's still a memorial, but it's not. I don't know. I've always found that fascinating how they're trying to like make something so vile, like I don't want to say mundane, but trying to like, I don't know. I'm rambling, but I don't know if you've
totally, like with Sachsenhausen, like it was a concentration camp turned into a Stasi or NKVD. Sorry, getting into the different NKVD camp. And then like another one is the German Olympic Stadium that was the lightning rod. Here's modern Germany is going to be hosting an NFL game this fall. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of symbolic, I guess, renewal with that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, because having this discussion with the students, just like, okay, can you completely, or what is the value of completely eliminating this from the landscape? Or in the case of like Germany or the American South, you can't eliminate all pieces of it because you'd essentially eliminate everything. So,
I would add also in Nuremberg, they have that huge party ground area, and they use one of the main portions of it. That's where they park the city's garbage trucks. So there's like a lot of conscious decision making about how they're going to use that space and how it's going to be used now under this current situation or context.
Yes, and the rally grounds in particular are a big discussion, because as they start to crumble too, it's, do we spend the
Sure.
money to repair them and maintain them, or does it become a danger? And I know one of the ideas, so to Andrew, to your point, it was like, are they debated making them into art studios for local artists to use as a way to use that space again, but still not destroy it, but yeah, try to bring something new to it that's not just the horrible history. So it's a gray area. There is continued to be debated.
And like even here in the United States, like looking at the why can't I think of the word? The plantations, and how is the history being remembered is an important piece. Like you can't completely ignore it, but you can't focus too much on it. And it's, what are you focusing on is a big question. So Sheila had a question specifically with the ArcGIS piece. So ArcGIS, the Survey 123, it's basically a Google form that you build that has a it has a mapping element to it. So there's instructions on the presentation that go through the steps of how to actually set up a Survey 123. But basically you pre-make a survey where you're having the students, go through and say they're going to have to take a picture, they're going to have to talk about the significance, they're going to have to place, where is this monument or where is this place name located, and then they can go out into community, they can collect the data, and it will automatically generate a map. And then as a class, you can actually go through and analyze, and you can say, all right, here's where these sites are located. What's the significance of this? Why are these located here? Why isn't there anything over here? So Sheila, does that answer your question? Hope so.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. I'm always trying to figure out a way to implement that in my class, because it's such a cool tool for our school to have access to. And so I have never used the Survey 123, so I might try that this year with them.
And I mean, if you want to go not the full Survey 123, just honestly talk to the city tourism board, see if you can get a city map, and then
Nice.
collect and then pin them up on the map and just say, here's what I found, here's where I found it. They can bring in pictures if they want. And then you can start going through and analyze, and you can say, ooh, this pin is for a civil rights leader. Let's give that a blue pin. This pin is for a Native American. Let's give it a green pin. And you can start pinning it based on who is being represented in the different monuments.
Very good. I love it. Thank you.
Any other further questions, comments, concerns, compliments, cries of outrage?
So
The
the only thing. No, I was just gonna add, you had a question on that slide about, how else can we incorporate this? And I broke the hearts of my literature professors by being a little interdisciplinary. But I mean, I brought these into class, like literature classes, film classes, the history classes. You can bring them into anything because it's just helping them better understand the things that they're working with. So want to support you that this is not geography only.
Right.
These tools can be used in any classroom. Yeah. Okay.
Geography, because that's what I know, but like at the very, or in the abstract, I'm like, this can be used in American history, this can be used in world history and literature classes, world literature, just about anywhere. So yeah. All right.
Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, then I want to say thank you for everybody for joining us tonight, for everybody that's going to be watching it after, and thank you, Kyle, so much for taking the time to put on this presentation. And yeah, if anybody has any follow-up comments, you can email us after too and let us know.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Good to see you.